Hello everyone and welcome to June's Facebook Live Q&A on the Forces War Records Facebook page. Another month is here and it's time for our monthly live Q&A. If you're one of our regulars, thank you so much for joining us again. We're always grateful for those that tune in every month. And if you're new to the Q&A, well, thank you so much for taking the time to ask a question and to join us. And maybe we'll have you back in the future and you'll become one of our regulars. I'm Simon Pearce. I'm a military genealogist for Ancestry, but I also work on Forces War Records and our newspaper's website. And I've been doing it for over 10 years now, and I love helping you research your military family members. Family history is my passion. It's what I love doing, and there's nothing better for me than diving into the records, finding these stories, and working out what our military family members did. We've had lots of great questions come in, and we'll do a little bit of housekeeping before we dive into the questions. And I can see some people joining us already. So hello to those that are joining us. Feel free to say hi in the comments. Lovely to have you on board, and thank you for taking the time to join us. It's very kind of you. I'm just dropping in some notes into the comments as well. A very, very long comment I'm just popping in now to help later. Thank you for those that are taking the time to watch. And if you're watching live later on, well, thank you as well. It's very kind of you to take the time. I hope you're staying cool. It is a scorcher here in the UK. I hope you found a nice, cool place to sit down, do some research, cold drink, and get stuck into some military family history. We usually have the camera on in this session, but I thought today I'm melting. No one needs to see that. It's so hot, so we'll go camera off today. I've got a face for radio anyway. No one needs to see this. It's too hot. So we'll stick to the records. We'll just have a look through the records together and the audio, and the video will be available on the Facebook page for a month afterwards. Now, before we get started, hi Victoria, one of our regulars. Lovely for you to take the time to join us today on such a hot day. If you're new to this, you'll hear me mention throughout the session that I drop into the comments links to records, links to ordering military service records. You'll see them already. I've pinned some to the video. I've also just dropped in a huge comment with lots and lots of links, which I think is the best way at the moment I can think of doing it, because there's lots of records. And hi, Steve, one of our who's asked a question. Lovely to have you on board. Thank you for joining us. You'll notice in the comments I've just dropped in a huge comment with lots of links. So throughout this session, if you hear me say, see my First World War guide, or see my Second World War guide, or I don't know, see the British Army medal cards, have a look at that comment I've just posted at the very beginning of the in the comments. So that's going to have all the records that I talk about today that you can get stuck into, and it will be there. And the video stays up for about a month afterwards as well. Right, without further ado, let's get stuck into the records, because I think there's nothing better to do than to occupy our minds on such a hot day. And I think military family history is the perfect thing to get stuck into. And I have loved these questions. There are some absolutely brilliant ones. So let's jump into the first. And we're going to start off with Drew, who has a Second World War question. And I'm going to open up the image so we can have a look at this together, and I'll dive into the question. Let's do this. Right. Hi, Simon. I found these two ribbons amongst some of my father's memorabilia. I know they are not his medals, as my father was a coal miner, so he was exempt from being in the armed forces, so he was a reserved occupation. He was, however, an air raid warden, for which he received the Civil Defence Medal. But my uncle, John Christopher, did serve in the armed forces during the Second World War, and I think he was in the Royal Artillery. He joined the army in 1929, but then from family members who state he was recalled in the Second World War. I think he fought in Burma or India. And you have lots of other details, Drew, which is really helpful. And you have his number. So you've set the scene. You've got these medal ribbons, these dress ribbons, but not the medals themselves. Who do they belong to? And you've done the right thing. You know they didn't belong to your father, because you've ruled that out through your own research. So what do we do here in this instance? Right. Let's jump into my first note, my first thing. You have his number, which is really helpful, 819025. So if this was me, and you know his surname, if this was me, I would probably just search Forces War Records for that number, which we can do, and see what comes up. And it sounds like his surname was Christopher. So if anyone's researching military family members, one thing I like to do is a little bit of less is more. If you know the number, sometimes a surname and a number is enough to get going with. And there we can see, by searching for surname and number, we have 3 entries. And those entries, there's 2 here. They may be duplicates, but there's, oh no, tell a lie, there's 2 different ones. There are 2 entries for the India General Service Medal. That's very interesting. And 1 for the British Army medal cards. And we're going to touch on these British Army medal cards later, because this is a really good collection. But as we can see in this medal roll, we have here the War Medal, the 1939 to 45 War Medal for the Second World War. If this was issued alone, it was a very good indication that your uncle served in the UK or home shores alone without going overseas. But this is very much this is the General Service Medal, and I believe this is the India General Service Medal, Drew. And that would tie in with your belief that he served in India or Burma in the 30s. And when we jump back into the records I've just found, and you can, in your own time, you can click on these and look into them. It looks like he was awarded the India General Service Medal twice because there was one covering, and let me look at my notes because I remember there's two. I was just pinning this down earlier. There are two. One for service in India between 1908 and 35, and one between 36 and 39. So it looks like he was awarded two, perhaps, and maybe one with a bar. Um, which is really interesting. Or maybe he was so yeah, possibly. You'd have to dig into these a little bit deeper, but that would tie that would answer that. Now, when you look at this medal card here, Drew, it should tell you the medals that your uncle was entitled to, and you can have a look through those. And we'll be touching on this collection a little bit later for anyone researching Second World War family members. That will pin down the medals that he was awarded. There's a really good page on the Ministry of Defence website. If you just type in if you type in MOD medal entitlements, there's a really, really good page that breaks down all the medals you could be awarded and the criteria. And that's quite handy for knowing the criteria. And as we can see, I'm just going to scroll down quickly for us all to see together. But as we look down here, you have the criteria for the war medal that your uncle was awarded, Drew. So that will help you there. Now, in terms of next steps, if it was me, I would be looking for his service record. Now, that's going to give you the key clues. Now, you have his number, so that's really good. And I'm going to say this a few times throughout this session, but for anyone researching the British Army, their service records used to be held by the Ministry of Defence, but they've now, for the Second World War, or from 1921 onwards, they've been transferred to the National Archives. So the officers' records, they're still with the MOD. But if there were other ranks, a private, a corporal, sergeant, etc., their records have been transferred to the Ministry of Defence, to the National Archives. And you'll find the order forms and the links in the comments. So if it was me, Drew, I'd be ordering his service record from the National Archives, and that will give you all the key information, where he was serving, where he was posted, when he enlisted, and we're going to look at one a little bit later, and give you the key information. But yeah, hopefully that's enough to get you going started off with. But that is a really, really good question to start off with, and thank you for that, Drew. Okay, the next question here is from Ian, and Ian's asked, let's have a look. Let's jump into my notes, shall we? Here. Okay. Um, During some recent research into my grandfather's First World War service, I was referred to the Scottish National Library. Um, I know that he joined the Territorial Force in 1911, so the precursor to the Territorial Army, and he was in the Royal Field Artillery. And he has connections to Scotland for his parents. So what would they hold? Well, I know that if you search online for soldiers that died in, there are wills for Scottish soldiers who died. They're in a different repository. That's worth looking at if you're researching someone was killed. But I would have a look at my First World War research guide. I've linked to it in the comments. It will give you a full account of like how to research a First World War family member. And for anyone who's also doing this kind of research, it tells you where you might find a record, the kind of records that will shed light on their service, how to get started and search tips. And my First World War research guide is really what I would get started with and have a look for his medal card. Can you find a pension card, a service record? It's all, or even a newspaper article. It's all outlined in my guide, Ian. And we're going to go into these records as we go along as well. And in fact, in a moment with Steve's question. But hopefully, Ian, that's enough to kind of get you started. But I really do think my guide is the good starting point, really, for quite for you for your situation where you're just starting out. Okay, next question is from Steve, and I believe Steve's joining us live. So hi, Steve. Thank you so much. Hi there. I'm trying to trace my grandfather George Buckle's service, who served in the First World War. I have found records on Forces War Records, but I can't find much else, and it becomes a bit of a minefield to try and get information. Any help would be appreciated. This is a good point you raise, Steve, because it is hard. It is hard when you get started knowing really what to look for. Um, what I would do, and like we did with in Drew's instance, I would search Forces War Records. And let's have a look because I've got some pages up here ready to share with everyone. Let's start again, shall we? So let's do what we did with Drew's family member, and we'll do the same with yours. Here's Steve. So Buckle is the surname. I'm a big advocate of less is more. When you know a number and a surname, I just search with that to get started with. There are pitfalls to that, and we'll touch on that later. But the fact that you provided this number now, when I search here, Steve, you can see here the top entry. He appears in the pension ledgers and index cards. This is one of my favorite collections for researching First World War family members, and it's a real bonus for family historians, particularly if their service record was destroyed. Now, in this list, I can see a medal card. I can see a daily report at the bottom, which is linked to the casualty list. So it looks like he could have been wounded, or we know he was wounded because you've provided me that extract. Now, for anyone who is quite new to research and hasn't heard this before, about 60%, 60, around 60% of First World War service records were destroyed or badly damaged during the Blitz. The building that was housing them was hit in September 1940, and sadly for us, those records took huge damage, a lot of my military family members, their First World War records were destroyed. It looks like, Steve, George's record was destroyed, but we can fill in the gaps. We can use things like this medal card. Now, when you look at his medal card, and let's have a little look together, shall we? So here's his medal card. Let's take a look together. What can we make of this? Okay. When I look at this, I can see that he joined the West Yorkshire Regiment. We have his number, really helpful, his rank, his date of joining. So we can see here that he joined on the 12th of August 1960. Now, not all medal cards mention this, but this one does, and that's really helpful. And he was also discharged in April 1919. And that gives you the paragraph. Now, my next step here, it doesn't give you a huge amount. These dates here are very, very helpful, but it doesn't give you a lot to work with. It just says he was in the West Yorkshire Regiment. Now, if it were me, I've been in this situation before. Sometimes a medal card can be really specific. So this is just an example for everyone at home. Here's one for William Smith. We can see here that it tells you, this medal card tells you the date he first entered a theatre of war. That's really helpful. But you might notice as well, it's quite vague in the unit. Just like with your ancestor, Steve, it just has the regiment, West Yorkshire Regiments. The same implies here with this soldier, Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers and the Northumberland Fusiliers. Okay, so what I like to do, and again, same thing here, Thomas Smith, even less information for this card, Connaught Rangers. So what I would do is turn my attention to the medal rolls. And these are on Ancestry. And as I mentioned at the start, or I usually mention at the start, Ancestry and newspapers.com are part of the, Forces War Records and newspapers.com are part of the Ancestry family. And sometimes you need to look in more than one place for records. And on Ancestry, there are the medal award rolls. And I've linked to these in that big comment that I pinned at the start of this session. Now, Steve, I would run your ancestor's name through these because, as we can see here, this Thomas Smith, the medal card doesn't give you the battalion, the specifics that we want to trace his movements. But when we look at the medal roll, sometimes the medal roll just gives us that extra snippet. And here we can see 1/Connaught Rangers, the 1st Battalion. So I would do the same thing with your ancestor here with George. See if you can find a battalion. Now we know when he joined up. I would then turn my attention to the war diaries. And I cover this in my First World War research guide, Steve, that you'll find in the comments. The war diaries will give us a day-to-day account of what his battalion was doing, what they were experiencing, and you can track his movements and see what he was up to. The challenge we have here is that without a service record, it can be very challenging. Without a service record, it can be very challenging, and we often have to fill in the gaps. It might be worth looking at newspapers too. I always search newspapers when I'm researching military family members, just in case there's any extra bit of information. We'll look at some newspapers in a minute. But I think with my guide and with the tips I've shared there, Steve, hopefully that might be enough just to get started. But have a go with the research, have a go with the guide, and see how you get on. And you're always welcome back to another Q&A. We do these monthly. We haven't missed one since last October 2022. So we do these monthly, and we're always here. So yeah, see how you get on there, and hopefully that's enough to get started with. But brilliant question. Thank you for that. Okay, here's one from Richard. We're going to jump back into the Second World War now and to the Air Force. Hi, Simon. This is a difficult topic, but as part of a wider research piece, I'm trying to establish what happened to my father's mid-upper gunner after he was declared LMF, which I believe is lacking moral fibre, which feels rather harsh, after their 11th operation. I know more generally how poorly aircrew suffered for fatigue and trauma were treated, but it seems odd that searching for him by name doesn't bring up any records on Forces War Records. Name and place of birth is all I have to go on, along with the squadron and the period of the crew were together. Any ideas would be gratefully received. Okay, this is a really good question. Really good question, Richard. Second World War RAF research, and there's some really, really good records out there. Um, okay, first of all, Richard, using the link in the comments, I would order his Second World War service record from the Ministry of Defence because Navy and RAF Second World War service records are still with the MOD. So get hold of that. That will give you all the key information about him, who he served with and when, the squadrons, when he was discharged, where he was from, etc., etc. Really, really useful information. Might be worth searching newspapers too. Local papers were absolutely brilliant at reporting on people in the forces. Here's an example here for everyone. This is the Evening Sentinel. I believe that's a Staffordshire or based paper. Um, Sometimes you get lucky, you find a photo, sometimes you get an article, but just to share this one here to give everyone at home a little bit of an idea that, local papers always, always worth searching. Another collection that I like to search is the Royal Air Force Nominal Index of Airmen. Again, I've linked to this in the comments. It's a very simple collection. It's not particularly detailed, but it's a good starting point for getting a number. So if you know his name, like this soldier here, airman here, Vernon Taylor, gives you his number, a joining date. Now I appreciate that's very difficult if they've got quite a common or generic, a very popular name, but that could be a starting point. I always run names through this collection. It's very, very helpful. But what's the next step here? Well, we'll try and get hold of his service record, as you said, newspapers, looking at that airman record I just showed you, shared there. But you've helpfully mentioned that you know his squadron number. And for anyone who's new to research, um, the RAF were broken down, to put this very simply, the RAF were broken down into squadrons, a certain number of planes. And whenever I'm researching a squadron, I always turn my attention to the operations record books. Now, I've linked to these in the comments. You'll find them in the comment section. And we talk about these quite regularly. Any of our regulars on the Q&A will know that I bring these up quite regularly. But again, one of my absolute favorite collections for researching. These give you day-to-day accounts of what an RAF squadron was doing. Now, I've picked out an example here of 153 Squadron for you, Richard. You can see here the date, the aircraft type and number, which is very cool, the crew. Now that's really important. You'll be able to then find your father's mid-upper gunner through the crew section because it names the crew. It names their duty, so their trades, if you like, the time the mission went up, the time it came down, the details. And as you scroll through these books, you often have these basic summaries, and then you get the more detailed summaries as well. You'll notice as you go through, really, really good collection. So when you're on the main search page, what I like to do, and for anyone watching this, if you know the squadron number, if you see the right-hand side, you have this squadron section here. I like to just toggle down here and find the squadron number and work through it that way. That's just how I do it and how I like to find records. But that's how I would go about it, Richard. See how you get on with those clues there. I hope it helps. I'm really intrigued to see what you find. And what comes next. So please keep us updated. But that's a brilliant question, and thank you so much for getting involved. Okay, we have one here from Paul. Um, I've been researching my late stepfather's World War II RAF career. So quite a similar question here. And to sort of summarize, the person, Paul's stepfather was court-martialed in the Second World War, but then on the day of being court-martialed was re-enlisted and rejoined the RAF. And you're really trying to work out what happened. And you applied for some records from the National Archives, but it didn't tell you a lot. Now, you have his service records, so that's really helpful. Service records often do reference a court martial and sometimes the details, but maybe in this instance it's been quite vague. So what would I do? I'd have a look at newspapers. I know I say that a lot, but I really do believe strongly in how valuable newspapers are for family history. You've already ordered some records from the National Archives, and let me share this page with everyone at home. And in fact, I don't think I called it up, so let me, or maybe I've linked it in the comments, but basically the National Archives holds a collection on court martials in Air 18, and you can search for it by name. So I would search on Google, Paul, for National Archives court martial records, and they've got a really good page on RAF court martials. There's a section within the National Archives called Air 18, and you can search by name. Now, by reading the description, they say that the court martial records are more substantial and detailed in Air 18. I think you may have been provided court martial summaries from a different folder. So have a go again at those with from the from the National Archives. It may also be worth trying the RAF Museum. I'm a big advocate of local museums and regimental museums, and you never know what they'll be able to help and tell you as well. But again, let us know how you get on there because that's a really, really good question. It's nice to see some RAF questions coming in as well, which is fantastic. And thank you to everyone who's dropping in questions in the comments. We'll get through the pre-submitted ones first, and we'll try and make time for the live questions. But hopefully, if we don't get around to your question, there's always next month. But also, maybe the questions we answer today will be quite similar, and will give you some inspiration and some tips to go away with. So I apologize if we don't quite get around to the ones in the comments. Hopefully, the questions we do answer are quite similar and help. Okay, next question. Here's one from Christine. This is quite a long question, Christine, and a very good one. So I'll summarize. You're researching John Patrick Nolan, who was born on the 14th of September, 1866. So we're diving into the Victorian era here, a period I love to research family members. And if you're researching or interested in researching a Victorian era military ancestor, it is possible to do. There are service records, there are muster rolls, there are medal collections, really, really cool collections out there. And I've written a guide to researching Victorian family members, which will help you, Christine, but also anyone watching. So you'll find that in the comments. But basically, and it's quite a long one, you're trying to find out when John Patrick Nolan was where he was born and his parents' names. Now you've got his date of birth. He spent a lot of time in India, and you've done a lot of research, which is really impressive, Christine. Very, very impressive, the amount of research that you've done. And you want to, in short, you want to know where he was born and his parents' names. Now, a service record will be my first port of call. We have these on Forces War Records covering the Victorian era and into the late 18th century. And if you look in the comments, it's called the Royal Hospital Chelsea Service Records Collection. Now, don't let the name put you off. Just because it says Royal Hospital Chelsea, it doesn't mean it's inpatients. It includes those that were granted a pension but were living out of the Royal Hospital of Chelsea, but they were collecting their pension essentially from the Royal Hospital, to put it kind of broadly. Here's an example service record. This soldier, I had to choose one with really hard handwriting. I apologize. It's quite difficult to read, although the handwriting's beautiful, but quite hard to read. But he signed up in looks like the 9th of December 1891. So this will be a similar-ish period to when the person I think it's your great grandfather, Christine. Look for the service record if you haven't already. See if he appears within this section. Now, he died in 1908, I believe, in India. Um, Quite often, the service records in this period, if the soldier died in service, their service record tends to have been destroyed. Not always, but generally. But the reason I mention this is because this is where you're likely to get next of kin information. And if I scroll through, where is the next of kin page? Let me find it here. Okay, this one at the end. Very, very similar. If you've seen a First and Second World War service record, it's really interesting to note that these Victorian era service records are very, very similar. The structure, the pages, the questions. It's really, I find it amazing. I mean, I love research and I find it really interesting to see the similarities that have stayed over the decades and centuries. Um, anyway, I'm getting distracted. Here is the next of kin. So here, this soldier here has mentioned his father and his address. So that's really what you want. So if you can find Christine the service record, that would be brilliant. To cover all bases, you've mentioned that he died in Quetta, I believe it is, in India. And you've been doing some research and contacted them, and you've used the FIBIS, the Families in British India Society, very, very good website for Indian research, but no luck. BAXA, British Association for Cemeteries in South Asia, and the link is in the comments. This is a really, really good database, and this has helped me a few times before when I'm researching soldiers that sadly died in India and were buried there. And I found, and they have an extensive database of headstone photos. Really, really interesting. Just see if you can find his headstone. Now, it's unlikely that it's going to mention his parents or any, place of birth. But, in family history, we leave no stone unturned. If you don't search it, sometimes there's that nagging feeling, oh, what does it tell us? What could it tell us? So just see if you can find a photo of his headstone. It may not survive. There may not be a headstone photo in there, Christine, but always worth having a look. Okay, and now looking at the rest of my notes, have I covered everything here? Because there was a lot that we were going to talk about. I think that's everything off my list there. Oh, well, and the thing is, you have a date of birth as well. So the difficulty you have here, Christine, is, and we're delving into a bit of general genealogy here, but you have his date of birth. That's really helpful, but it's quite a popular name, John Patrick Nolan. That's quite tricky. But the fact that you know when he was born, if it was me, I would look at the General Register Office birth indexes. I would search for John Patrick Nolan's and John Nolan's born in the last two quarters, so the third and fourth quarters of 1866, because you have his date of birth, so you know he wouldn't have been registered in the first and second quarters, and see if you can find and start whittling them down. Look for an obituary in Indian and British newspapers just to see if anything mentions him there. You have his marriage record, which often mentions a parent's name, but it sounds like it didn't mention it because I think the extensive research you've done, Christine, you would have mentioned that because you've got his marriage record. That's a shame it doesn't mention his parent, but maybe the records of those that married in British India didn't mention parents. That's how I would get started for the moment. There's a lot there I've thrown out there, I appreciate. But hopefully, just hopefully that might give you something to work with. Oh, one more thing. How could I let that slip my mind? Okay. I believe I've linked in the comments to a guide on the National Archives website about muster rolls. If you're researching a family member that served in the British Army in the late 18th century and into the 19th century, muster rolls are one of the best and sometimes only sources for tracking their movements. They're often monthly books that list all the men of a regiment, their pay, and the first entries when they join the regiment often give you an enlistment date. Now, in that guide that I've linked to the National Archives, Christine, there's also a piece, a section on enlistment. What were they called now? I'm trying to remember what the name of the title is. It's description books. There we are. There's also a section on the description books, and I would have a look and see if you can find the description book for his regiment, because that often gives you a place of birth, and that might just give you an extra clue to help navigate your searches. I appreciate there's a lot there that I've thrown out, but hopefully, just hopefully, that's enough to kind of, guide you through there and help you with your research. But that's a brilliant question. And I love the fact we're jumping from the First and Second World War into the Victorian era. And now with John's question, we're back into the Second World War. And after 2 years, writes John, I finally received my granddad's service record. And that's a lovely moment. I remember when my great grandfathers came through the post, and I just couldn't wait to get stuck into it and see what he did and experience a really, really special moment. It seems he was bounced about quite a bit, first with the Essex Regiment, then with the Greenhowards. I'd like to find out what action he saw. Where would be the best place to find more information? This is a brilliant question, John, and I think if you're researching a Second World War family member, this is going to be very relevant for a lot of people watching. So let's dive into these together. Firstly, and I haven't dropped this into the comments, what I'll do is I will drop this in this video, and let me drop this into the comments now because I forgot to put this one in earlier. Service and casualty form. Service and casualty form World War II. Okay. You've got his service record, which is really good, John. And you will see the video playing on screen is of me talking about the service and casualty form from a British Army Second World War service record. This is the best page, in my opinion, for researching the movements of a Second World War family member. Now, it tells you the unit they served with, where, the dates, if they were hospitalized, if they went on leave, if they were punished. A really, really good collection. So that's the first and foremost. You have his service record. So piece together his movements using that there. But what do we do next? Well, once you know the units he served with, and there's a lot of people watching who probably hear me say this quite a lot. War diaries. War diaries are your next port of call. They're one of the best sources for researching what someone experienced during the First and Second World War. They give you a day-to-day insight into what a unit was doing. Now, a number of them have been digitized on Ancestry, and there's a link in the comments to find that collection. But there are also a number that are still at the National Archives. So here's an example here, and we'll look at the National Archives one in one moment so we can search those together. But here's an example for the 55th Heavy Anti-Aircraft Regiment of the Royal Artillery. They are, let's have a look, June 1943. They are in Middle East, in the Suez, getting ready for the invasion of Sicily the following month. It gives you the day, what was going on. This is a great source for working out what they were doing and what they were experiencing. So War Diary is really good. And not only do The monthly pages give you, or the daily pages from each month give you really interesting information, but the appendices at the end of each month often contain reports, sometimes maps. So it's worth looking at the appendices like this one here. You never know what you're going to find. I even remember, let's show you with you this map here. Uh, oh, did I forget to put it in? No, no. Oh, maybe I did. Well, that's a great shame. I had a map I wanted to share with everyone, but it looks like I might have forgotten to drop it in. Well, that's a shame. Anyway, never mind. You might find some really, really useful maps at the end as well, and they're always worth looking for. So really, really, really good source there. Now, so try and find the war diaries for the battalions he served with. Now, you can find them. There's also a guide on the National Archives. So here we are. The National Archives has a really good guide on Second World War service records, and they've broken them down into these categories here for the different theatres. Now, if anyone's searching at home, here's how I like to search for war diaries, and we can do this together. So let's have a look. Let's go to the National Archives homepage, search the catalogue. So this is how I like to do it. We'll go to the advanced search. Okay, so just to give you an example here, and then if you're watching at home, this might help as well. So I don't know the battalion that your grandfather served with, John, but let's take the Essex regiments. Let's just for the argument's sake, he served with the first Essex regiment. So one Essex. There we go. I'm trying to spell. It's the heat. Right. Okay. So one Essex. I like to put diaries in the second field, so it narrows down to diaries. I wanted to search in WO, which is War Office, which is where the diaries are kept. Um, and let's say you're looking for the diaries of 1943, just to start off with. Now, if you're looking for the regiment, I often like to use a wildcard and add in REG for reg, because sometimes it's spelt REG, REGT, or in full. And this wildcard will search for all the different examples. And when we search for that, we get some examples. We have the first of the fourth, we have the first Essex Scottish. But you see that the point I'm making, the first Essex Regiment, this is how you pin down the war diaries if they're not on Ancestry and you need to look at the National Archives. And for anyone watching at home, hopefully that little tip there will just help you find them, help you pin them down. But of course, you can extend the dates if you wanted to do it for the whole of the war. You could do 39 to 45 and do it that way. Some carry on into 46, but generally they start to wind down. You do see some for the Korean War, but generally speaking, they start to wind down in about 46, the war diaries. So hopefully that helps you there, John. See how you get on with your research. You're always welcome back anytime at all if you have any follow-up questions. And yeah, hopefully that helps. How are we halfway through the session already? That is incredible. Thank you everyone hanging in there. I hope you're all doing okay, keeping cool, or as cool as you can in this weather. But thank you for watching and taking the time. It means a lot, actually. This is the highlight of the month for me, the Q&A. I love doing it. I love hearing from you and helping you with your research. Always look forward to it. Um, yeah, it's just a privilege. Okay, let's go into question 8 from Paul. I'm trying to find my father's service record and his medals. And this is another really good question, Paul, that can help a lot of people watching. He was in the British Army. Hopefully, you can help me find my dad's records and maybe his brother's records too. And I appreciate, Paul, you also mentioned some Australian connections, and I've linked you to the National Archives of Australia that has some Australian records. But basically, Paul, for this one here, it's quite similar to some of the questions we've had here already. So for anyone watching, the first thing I would do is check ancestry. So what we want when we're researching a Second World War family member, particularly British Army, we want their service record. Now, many have been digitized by Ancestry, and I showed you at the start, I mentioned at the start that the comments have the link to 3 collections. They've been broken down into 3. This one here saying UK military service records 39 to 59. They've also done the Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, that's in its separate collection, and also what's known as smaller units, which is in a separate collection. And that's, the Pay Corps, the military police, and you'll find all the links to these collections. But basically, let's just search with my name, just for an example. Let's just search my name. When you get the service record, Paul, there's many pages. Let's have a look here. Let's just dive into this one here. When you get the service record, it's going to contain some really useful information. I should point out that due to data protection, much of the medical side and the very sensitive information has been redacted. And you may see on the National Archives website, it might say redacted until, I don't know, 2040. It's usually the medical that's just the medical information. A lot of people contact us and say, oh, my father or grandfather's record, it's been held, until 2040, I'll never see it. But actually that reference on the National Archives website is often it is the medical information. So what we see on here is the folder without the medical stuff. And we can see here really useful information. So we have the attestation page and look at the similarities. Remember earlier when we were talking about the service record for the Boer War? How amazing is it to see the similarities when we go back and when we go back to here's one from 1890. 50 years later, when this soldier enlisted, and we were looking at his record a moment ago, but 50 years later, when we look at his record, I have to find where it is now. I've distracted myself. Look at the similarities. I mean, I think that's amazing personally. And as we scroll through this pool, and as you do the same for your father and your uncles, whenever you find that records, you'll see pages that tell you where they served. So on the left-hand side, the military history sheet is incredible. Home, Northwestern Europe, home again. I can't quite read the next one, but there you go. Is that military reserve? I'm not sure. Anyway, the point is you get some great information there. It tells you the medals they were entitled to, and we're going to touch on this on them in a moment as well. And I mentioned earlier the service and casualty form. We'll find one of these shortly as I scroll through. Scrolling. Will there be one? I bet there isn't now. I've said that. Yes, there is service and casualty form. And we touched on that in that video. But when you get the service and casualty form, Paul, here you are. You have, and let's look at this together. The incident, so posted to number 14 Technical Training Center in Chepstow. And you have the dates and you can track the movements that way. So that's really helpful there. So that's service records. But as I've mentioned, Paul, his service record may not have been digitized yet. Ancestry is digitizing millions of these service records, and I've been part of the process. And if you look on the Ancestry YouTube channel, you'll see a video we recorded last November of behind the scenes of how we've been digitizing. And we're getting these uploaded in phases because there are so many. It's a huge project. If you can't find them on Ancestry, apply via the National Archives pool using the link in the comments, the National Archives order form, and hopefully that helps you as well. But you believe you've got some brothers, his brothers, your uncles served as well. Well, run their names through Forces War Records. Can you find them in the papers? Are there any clues that they may have served? If they serve with the Air Force or the Navy, then their records are going to be with the MOD instead of the National Archives. But one thing to look at as well are the medal cards, and we're going to touch on these. These are a bit relevant for some other people later on as well. Some other people that have asked questions, but these medal cards are available on Forces War Records. The link is in the comments. I'm going to have some water. Staying hydrated, talking a lot. Okay, these medal cards, if you haven't seen them yet, we released them on Forces War Records in November 2024. Incredible collection, absolutely incredible. Now, as you can see, these are the application forms. So when your family members apply for a medal, they filled these out and we get all this amazing information. Now, you may see some applications filled out by the next of kin. If you do, this address section will be redacted. It'll have a white square over it, as will their name down here. That's because they're redacted for 82 years after the stamp. So on the basis that most people, there's an assumption that they were 18 when they applied. So 82 years, that makes 100. That's the 100-year rule for data protection. So the next of kin, if they applied, you'll see a redaction, but you'll still get the key information. You'll get the medals. So this soldier here, we see the medals he was entitled to: the 39 to 45 star, the France and Germany star, the war medal, and this little 3 shows you that he was entitled to 3 medals and no clasps. But the reason I point this out is that we get some really valuable information. We get their number, we get the date they were discharged. This 47 is not necessarily their age, it's usually the service group number. So men were discharged in batches. It often depended on their length of service. And we cover this in our blog on the blog page about this collection. So this probably wasn't his age, this will be his group number. But the reason I want to point this out is that quite often when we're researching Second World War family members, we'll be searching and searching. We can't pin them down because, there may not be a next of kin, an address, a date of birth on that record to help narrow them down. But if you know your ancestors' address, if you know where they lived, this is going to help you with more, a greater degree of confidence, confirm, right, this is my family member. And that's why I wanted to point these out because they're absolutely brilliant. So that's worth bearing in mind. And you can still apply for records, for medals for the Second World War, Paul. I've dropped a link into the comments, but there's an application form here. You can still apply for Second World War medals. There's a link in the comments on how to do it. And yeah, it's really worth having a look at. So hopefully, Paul, that gets you that helps you out as well. You mentioned you could have been the Royal Artillery. Might be worth looking at the tracer cards. I think I've got an example of those a bit later. Let's have a look. I was certain I did, and that's a very good collection, but maybe I've forgotten to add them in now. Well, that's okay. We can find these a little bit later. But yeah, there's lots to get stuck in there, and hopefully, just hopefully that helps. But let's dive into the next question. Here's one from Gary. Okay. Gary mentions, let's get my notes up here. It's very hot. Right, okay. I'm researching or trying to find a relative that served abroad in the Second World War. We have photos from memory, but what we know, he wasn't frontline. You contacted the National Archives and they carried out a search. They came back with a name that neither matched our relative or his date of birth. And having questioned this, we were given another name, which was his, and a service number, which we never had. But the date of birth was out slightly on the year, but the day and month were correct. So, assuming this information is coming from handwritten documentation, I'm not having much luck with Q and what could be my next step. So, basically, what's happened is Gary's applied for a Second World War service record for a relative. He's not been able to find a record under the details he assumes and you know his ancestor's name, but they've come back with someone of the same name with a date of birth. The year is out, but the month and day is the same, and it could be right because these these errors occurred. Sometimes people lied about their age to join up. Sometimes clerical errors happened. So what you have to do at the moment, I think, Gary, is assume that this record, assume that the record you're looking at is correct. The one that has the slightly wrong date of birth is correct, and you are going to have to hold on and apply for that one. So I'd apply for that for the National Archives. It does take time because of high demand, and I know it's frustrating, but hopefully when it comes, there'll be enough information in that service record to help you pin down the person you're researching. But do check the ones that have been digitized by Ancestry already, because that could be worth doing too. Now, um, have a look at medal cards. Now, we've already touched on these already. Here's another one. Here's one for a different soldier, Sergeant Oliver Carter. As I mentioned, Gary, if you know his address, this the medal card, if you applied for his medals, not only gives you this useful information, but it'll give you a number. It'll give you a regiment. This will help you then confirm if the service record of the National Archives is him. So that's worth doing as well. What else would I do in this instance? I'd have a look at the 1939 register. So this is on Ancestry. For anyone who's not used the 1939 register before, this was taken on the 29th of September 1939, so a month into the Second World War, and it provides an amazing snapshot of our family on the home front. It doesn't include the army or the armed forces, but there are some exceptions. But it might be worth just looking and seeing where he was at the outbreak of war. Had he been called up by now? Because if he doesn't appear with his family, Gary, there's a chance he was called up. I always like to check the 1939 register just to see if you can match the address in 1939 with the medal card. That might help you that way. It's also worth looking at on the right-hand side. The eagle-eyed of you may have noticed here, this person here was an ARP warden. It also lists their civil defense roles, which is very, very cool. A really, really great addition. It's just a brilliant snapshot of our family on the home front a month into the war, but that might just be an extra source to look at. We've covered medal cards. I'd have a look in newspapers. Search for him in newspapers, Gary. Local papers were brilliant at reporting on local men. Look at this article here from the Grimsby Evening Telegraph, which actually is a really good paper. I find that it's really good when I do military research, the Grimsby Telegraph, for reporting on local people. But that's besides the point. What I'm trying to point out is that newspapers are incredible for reporting on people in the forces. And here's some photographs. It has some little bit of a snapshot. Sometimes it tells you where they're working, so a little bit of a pen picture. Have a look. Another one here, local men serving overseas. Always worth in the Scunthorpe Evening Telegraph. So always worth having a look, Gary, at newspapers as well. But in the meantime, I think you are going to have to hold on for that service record, which I know is frustrating, and I know it feels like a long wait, but I do think that that's the option at the moment. But yeah, just hopefully it holds the clues that you're waiting for, and come back. If you get it and you need more help, you're always welcome to come back. Okay, next question from Rebecca. My grandfather always said that he used to drive Lord Montgomery around. So Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery in the Second World War, commander of Allied forces in D-Day. How can I find out more about that? I'm not sure how to find his service number. I found two that could be his, but is it possible to have two service numbers? Well, to answer the service numbers question first, Rebecca. mm, Probably not for the Second World War. You might notice anyone watching at home when you're researching a military, a military family member. And let's have a look at this medal card again. We sometimes see for the First World War that a soldier has two service numbers. Can you see here, William Smith, two numbers, one for the Royal Inniskilling Fusiliers and one for the Northumberland Fusiliers. These were regimental numbers. They were issued by the regiment. But in 1920, there was an army order that was brought in that standardized army numbers, and they were issued by the army. So they become unique. So it's unlikely that he had a two numbers in the Second World War, Rebecca. But what you really need to do is find his service record. So using some of the hints and tips that I provided, look on Ancestry. If it's not there, find him in the National Archives. Look at the medal cards and search for newspapers as well. Try and build up, leave no stone unturned and try and find his service record and any details. And if you do get a number, maybe search with his surname and number on Forces War Records and Ancestry as well, because we have lots of records on Forces War Records, and one of the records that comes up quite a lot are the daily reports of wounded, missing, etc., and that could contain a reference to him. Now, in terms of like driving Field Marshal Montgomery, honestly, it's certainly possible. It certainly is, but a service record might not explicitly state that. And that's challenge. That's where the challenge comes in. So, if I believe many of the drivers were Royal Army Service Corps, perhaps. Was he a driver? Was he recorded as a driver in his service record? Is there any reference to that? I do think it's going to be, I don't think it's explicitly going to say um, that he drove Montgomery, but it'll be worth looking at the service and casualty form of his service record. Look if he was posted to a different unit. Look if this is probably where it's going to say in this section here, Rebecca. So that's probably your best bet there. And hopefully that just gives you some clues to hang on to. Okay, here's one from Steve. My grandfather was in the Army Service Corps throughout the First World War. I found it very difficult to find any information about his service. What? Okay, so the first thing is, Steve, what do you know about his service? Are there any family stories? It's always worth speaking to people in the family. If there's always someone in the family who the custodian of family history, who might have kept letters, diaries, try that way. Have a look on Ancestry because I found military family members where, distant ancestors or distant family members of mine have created a tree and uploaded photos, and because they have memorabilia in their collection that I don't, and so that's worth doing as well. Now, Steve, his service record may not have survived, as I mentioned at the beginning, and this is covered in my World War One research guide in the comments. His service record could have been destroyed. So what you then have to do is fill in the gaps using the medal cards, the pension ledgers, newspapers. These are the kind of things that are going to help you with detail. Now, the Army Service Corps is very difficult to research because it was made up of lots and lots of different companies. It's a lot harder to research than the infantry, where you have first, second, third battalion, etc., etc., etc. There are and when we looked earlier at the medal rolls, let me pull one out. Can we see here? Remember the medal rolls on Ancestry? It has this soldier's battalion. I found quite often from the Royal Army Service Corps that it doesn't mention a specific unit. Let's have a look here. Here's one for the Royal Field Artillery. Here we see Lawrence Summers. I find that with the Royal Engineers, the artillery, the Army Service Corps, quite often it just has the unit. And that is when it gets tricky because these are huge, huge units. And that makes it tricky for piecing together his movements, if I'm honest, Steve. So my best bet really would be to look at my First World War research guide, follow the steps, and just try and build up a picture from any records that you have at all. And hopefully, I just hope you, because sometimes you do just need a little bit of luck when you're researching as well. Good luck. I really do hope that helps. And thank you for getting involved. Okay, question 12. This is the last of the pre-submitted questions. So we'll do James's question here, and then we'll jump into some of the live ones, and I'll just pick some out at random. I'm trying to find out if my grandfather served in the South Africa in the Boer War. So 1899 to 1902. You have his name, Royal Army Service Corps, born in 1869, and he died on the 26th of March 1916. He's buried at Aldershot Military Cemetery. Now, looking at that, James, I don't know if he was serving still in the First World War and died, or was he a pensioner? Was he buried in Aldershot Military Cemetery? If he was serving in the First World War, then there's a good chance there'll be a number of records available by just searching his surname and number on Forces War Records. I mean, we can try that now. Why don't we do that together? Let's have a look together, shall we? So let's find one together. So you have his name, and I'm going to dive into some other records as well. Okay, let's just try back on here. Where's a good tab that I can use? Bear with me one moment. Let's just find it. Okay, the internet's just being a little bit slow. Here we go. All good. Right. So you know his name, Harwood. So let's do my principle of less is more. Harwood, the surname, and you've got his number here, which is 1046. This might not bring anything up, to be fair, but it might do as well. Okay. His name was Robert. Brilliant. Okay, this is interesting. Oh, this is very interesting. Um, a number of entries here, as we can see. Oh, wow, this is really interesting. There's a lot here, actually. Okay, James. So try searching with Harwood and 1046. What we can see here is an entry. Now, I say this, that this TISR, this prefix that you often see with certain units, like the Army Service Corps, which can be a specific reference to their role or what they were doing in the Army Service Corps. And it's worth Googling that. There's some good websites out there with prefixes, details. Just make sure that, because we look at this at face value. Don't take it at face value that this is definitely him. But the fact the numbers and the name is matching up is a really good sign. But just have a look through here. So already we have the pension ledgers. It looks like you've got lucky with a service record, which is absolutely brilliant. What else can we see? Soldiers died in the Great War, so it looks like, yeah, very sadly he was serving when he died. Soldiers' effects as well. Now I know your question is on the Boer War, but let's just have a look at these soldiers' effects records because we haven't touched on them today. And for anyone researching a First World War casualty, if you're watching live or watching back afterwards, really good collection. Now, when you hear the word effects, it makes you think of their possessions, but they're actually it's actually the money, their pay, and the war gratuity that was owed to their next of kin when the soldier died in service. So here we have Robert Harwood, Army Service Corps, very helpfully number one company. Now, if you didn't have his service record, now you do in this instance, we can see you have his service record, but if you didn't, that is absolute gold dust. That there died in Cambridge Hospital, Aldershot, and really sad. It's terribly sad when we look through these records and we see that the losses from the First World War, but we can see here as well the pay that was owed to him. And then in red is the war gratuity. What's really helpful about this collection is it mentions the next of kin, so his widow Edith. So for anyone researching a casualty, it's a very good, very poignant, but very good collection to search. Now, to get back to your specific question here, James, did he serve in the Boer War? Well, the service record that we've that's possibly his, that looks like it could be his, should mention that in the list. This service record up here, it should mention previous service, hopefully. There's other collections you can search too, and I've linked to these in the comments. Under these are the campaign medals. So Ancestry has a very good collection called the Campaign Medal and Award Rolls, and they have them for all different 19th and 20th century conflicts and postings, not for the First and Second World War, but they cover things like service in India, in the Middle East, the Boer War, service in China, etc., in the Crimea. And this is just an example from the Second Boer War, but what you can see is you get the number, which you know that, so you can match it up that way, rank, name, and for the class. So the Boer War medals had different clasps for the theatres or battles they took part in. You can see a little line for different ones there. So here for Modder River, etc., and for Johannesburg, Diamond Hill, all these famous theatres and locations of the Second Boer War. So have a look there, and sometimes there's a remark at the end, England for duty or deceased. So that might help. And also on Ancestry as well. And we have a selection of Boer War records and Forces War records and Ancestry, but they also have the Boer War casualty records. So we can see here this soldier died, you have the date, who they were serving with, etc., and their number. So it's worth having a look at that as well. And you'll find James, in the comments, I've linked to a guide on Alexander Murray, who served in the Boer War and the Second World War and sadly died. It was a community story that we worked with one of our Facebook followers to research her ancestor. It's an interesting story, but it also has lots of links and tips about researching Boer War family members. So hopefully that helps there. But that's a really good question, and I mean that's the last of our pre-submitted. How long have we got here? We've got just over 5 minutes. Let's jump into some of the live questions, which you very kindly jumped in. And thank you for being patient. And again, we won't get around to everyone, but I really do hope that some of the questions we've answered today will help you with your research, and we'll just give you inspiration. Let's have a look here. Okay. It's one from Sarah. My late father was awarded the Burma Star in the Second World War. I can see from his very confusing service record that he was in India, but can't see any evidence that he fought in Burma. I'll just summarize here. So how did he, become to be awarded the Burma Star? That is interesting, Sarah, and that is very, very similar to my great grandfather. Now, my camera's off, but on my wall, we have a photo of my great grandfather and his medals. He was awarded the Burma Star too. He was in the Royal Engineers, he was a railway plate layer, and he was in, I believe, in Chittagong, which was very, very close to the Burmese border. And although he didn't serve in Burma, he was associated with the campaign. He was doing work that directly impacted it. He was very close to the border, but he was working on railways that supplied goods. And due to his proximity and the work he was deemed eligible for the Burma Star. Now, there'll be some, perhaps like your late father, Sarah, whose work was deemed eligible for the Burma Star. Now, I do appreciate that the service records can be tricky. They really, really can. But that service and casualty perform is going to be the page, excuse me, that's going to give you the clues. Once you know the unit he served with, so you get the regiment, you get the battalion, or you get the 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 company of the service corps or engineers, get their war diaries. Their war diaries at the National Archives are going to give you the day-to-day insight into what they were doing, and then you can really work out, and you might be able to tell that they were directly linked to the Burma campaign. One thing I should point out, if anyone's having trouble with records, it's worth bearing in mind that if you're a paid subscriber to Forces War Records, you have access to what's known as the document expert. And if I let's find that together. Okay, let's just see if I can find the document expert for you. So when you're on the homepage on Forces War Records, as I said, if you're a paid member, you go down to the bottom of the page and go to the document expert. You can upload a question, you can upload photos, records to our expert, who's very, very good and specializes also in identifying photos and medals. He's superb, absolutely superb. Um, Paid members can do that and take advantage of that and get expert advice on records. So if you are struggling and you are a paid member of Forces War Records, or if you're struggling with your research, you think, what do I do next? It might be worth, taking out a subscription and then using this feature because it's very, very good, very, very good, and worth bearing in that in mind. So that might just help as well. Okay, let's have a look at a couple more. Thank you, Sarah. That was a really, really good question as well. We're nearly at time, but hopefully, I hope you're all doing okay and keeping cool or as cool as you can. Okay. How can I obtain, so this one's from Sue. How can I obtain merchant seaman records from 1880 to 1910? My husband's paternal grandfather joined the Runciman line during the 1880s, but I'm unable to find any records. Okay, Sue. Merchant Navy research. Merchant Navy played a really important role, particularly in the First and Second World War. And we do have a selection of Merchant Navy collections on Forces War Records. But it can be difficult to research after between 1853, I believe, and 1918 because the Merchant Navy weren't required to keep these kind of cards, these service cards that we see from 1918 onwards. So anyone researching the Merchant Navy, my advice is just Google Merchant Navy National Archives. There's a really, really good National Archives guide to use researching Merchant Navy family members. And they'll outline the kind of records you might be able to find. And quite often you're looking for crew lists. So what you want is crew lists. And there are a number of them that are at the National Archives, um, Sue, but many of them also are in, I believe, in Southampton, and I believe it's in St. John's in Newfoundland, I believe. But just have a look at that guide on the National Archives website because that will help you. And then what you can do is you can piece together their movements using these crew lists. That's a really good question. Thank you. Okay, let's do one more before we wrap up. And okay, here's one from Denise. My uncle was a prisoner of war in the Second World War. I have some documents on it, and it says his documents were taken. His documents were taken. How can I find out more about his service records and where he was as a prisoner? Um, he did not get his medals until 1982. Okay, Denise, this is a really, really good question, and we've only got a couple of minutes, so I'll try and get through it quickly. But if you look in the comments, I've added a link to the Second World War prisoner of war liberation questionnaires. My first port of call, Denise, would be to have a look at those. They were about two-thirds of prisoners completed these after they were liberated, and they detail the camps they were held at. They detail the dates, the locations, if they carried out sabotage or if they tried to escape, and it will help you piece together his movements and give you a little bit more insight into his prisoner of war experience. That's one. There's also a prisoner of war collection that I don't think I've linked to. I might not quite have a chance now to find it, or will I? Let's just see. Let's have a look. Because this is worth it. Anyone researching prisoners, prisoners of war in the Second World War. So first of all, Denise and anyone else watching the liberation questionnaire. So you'll find the link there. But I really, really would, if I have time, I would love to be able to link you to this collection here. Okay, here's a blog on, and I'm going to drop this in very quickly. Researching World War II POWs. Okay, this guide here specifically focuses on not the liberation questionnaires, but the World War II POW collection that we have. It's good for researching those in Europe, but for those in the Far East, it contains the Japanese index cards. Don't quite have time to pull one up today, but they're very, very useful for those that were held but in the Far East. Maybe we'll touch on them again next time. So that will be another port of call. It sounds like you have some documents, but if you don't have his service record, Denise, I would apply from the National Archives to see if you can find his service record if it's not on Ancestry. And hopefully that helps. But there is a guide to researching Second World War family members, which is on in the comments, and hopefully that will help there. Hopefully, Denise, this is enough to get started with. But if that was a lot to take in, or I appreciate it was a little bit rushed, please feel free to drop in a question for next month or remind us next month, and maybe we'll go into a little bit more detail in those collections. But there are some very good Second World War POW records out there to help. And that is time. Thank you everyone so much for taking the time to join live. I know it's very hot, it's uncomfortable, but you know, your presence of joining me here, you know, is appreciated. I'm so grateful, and it's lovely that we can join each month and do this. And we've got a great community here, and I love answering your questions. I love hearing, you know, the research you're doing, and feel free to update us. You can message us, you can drop in comments on our content throughout the month. Always love hearing from you. And we'll do this again next month. It's always, or generally speaking, the last Thursday of the month from 1 to 2 p.m. We never miss one. And yeah, it's been an absolute pleasure. And you know, we have the anniversary of the Somme coming up. We're a couple of weeks away now, or a week away from the anniversary, the 110th anniversary of the Somme. We've got some really poignant videos and some blogs going out. And if you look on our blog page, there's a couple already that we've put out on the Somme and war diaries from the First World War that you might find interesting. But yeah, until we do this again next month, good luck with your research. Thank you for taking that time to join us or watching us back live. Take care, everyone. Stay hydrated, stay cool, and we'll do this next month. Okay, bye bye, everyone.